give you credit.
Hamilton saw the opportunity when an immigrant could come to this country, get a little education, have some great ideas, work hard, and build something. Pretty amazing guy.
Hamilton was born on the island of Nevis. Nevis is a very beautiful and colorful volcanic island in the Caribbean, but the day-to-day reality was very brutal and violent. Like most of the Caribbean islands at that time, it was dominated by sugar and cotton plantations.
Most people in America think of the slave trade as Africa to North America, but most of them went to the Caribbean. And so Hamilton was right in the middle of this huge, huge market. Even people who were not terribly well-to-do could have one or two slaves in Memphis, and his family did.
Hamilton's mother, Rachel, had just fled an unhappy marriage when she met his father, James Hamilton. But under the terms of her divorce, she wasn't able to remarry, which meant that Hamilton and his brother had to grow up with this stigma of illegitimacy, which was very real in those days. And so Hamilton goes through some really rough between birth and getting out of the island.
When Hamilton was 11, James Hamilton abandoned Rachel and the two sons on the island of St. Croix. Not long afterwards, Rachel contracted a lethal fever, which she then communicated to Alexander.
In the eye of a hurricane, there is fire. Just a moment. Yellow sky. I was 12 when my mother died. She was holding. We were sick and she was holding. I couldn't seem to die.
Hamilton suddenly found himself at the age of 13 an illegitimate orphan in poverty, and so he immediately had to go to work.
He worked for a trading charter as a kid, so he's getting first-hand economic education because the people who actually own it are off on ships trading, and he's in charge of the books back home.
When I was 17, a hurricane destroyed my town. I couldn't seem to die.
A hurricane destroys St. Croix. He writes a letter about the destruction he saw, and it's so beautifully written that a newspaper publishes it.
It was impressive enough and eloquent enough that people got together a charitable fund to send him to North America, to the North American colony, so he could get a real education.
And that's how he gets off the island. He literally writes his way out of the circumstances. And it's so much the quintessential immigrant story of redefining yourself when you come to a new place. And the sense I got really early in Ron Chernow's Hamilton biography was the sense of, I know this guy. The fact that Hamilton left the Caribbean to come to New York to get his education, I always tell people, I'm just playing my dad in the show. Down to the hair. Tell me about coming to New York for the first time. What brought you here?
I got a great opportunity to come and study at NYU. I left Puerto Rico when I was 18. I always thought Puerto Rico is just too small. I gotta see more. I graduated, then I was involved in advocacy, but I realized that I wanted to do something different. So I joined the Patch administration, mayor of New York City in '87. You know, in my experience, immigrants are never the lazy ones. They're not the stupid ones. They're the smart, hard workers, because they have to work so much harder to make sense of their reality and succeed in that reality. I always saw my time here as a temporary thing, but then I realized that this is where I was going to raise my children. Then we stay here forever.
Puerto Rico. And that was it. And then you were a New Yorker.
Alexander Hamilton is in New York just at the time as the tremendous ferment of the American Revolution is starting. On the Common, what is today City Hall Park, Alexander Hamilton is delivering fiery speeches. He also had established his bona fides as one of the most feared polemical writers in New York.
I really keyed into how much of a New York story it was. These blocks that I've passed all my life have all along been these incredible sources of rich American history. I don't think a lot of people know that. We think of the Founding Fathers, we think of them in some room in Philadelphia, you know, hashing it out. It's like a John Trumbull painting, but they were here, they were uptown. like the Grange in Hamilton Heights on 141st Street, which is where Hamilton and his wife lived for the last few years of his life.
This was Hamilton's study. And,
Right color.
right, money green. This is a reproduction of Hamilton's laptop, or his traveling desk. He would write everywhere and anywhere. He rode under trees, he rode on horseback, he rode in carriages.
I mean, the tonnage of his writing.
Exactly. The sheer amount that he must have had something with him all the time to be writing on, because it never would have produced the amount that he did.
Oh my goodness. All right. Can I touch the desk?
No.
Okay, I won't. That's cool. This just makes me feel like I have to go home and write. I started writing that first song that's just about his childhood. I wanted to sort of encapsulate that in 2 hip-hop verses.
The strongest candidate is the candidate who wins the most elections. Barack Obama has won 29 contests. Hillary Clinton has won 13 contests.
And I worked on it for about a year in the Heights while I'm still doing 8 shows a week.
Lynn didn't say I was writing a show. Lynn said I'm writing a song. So he said, I read this book, and I think there's something there. I think I might do a series of songs. I said, great, go, write.
I'd only written this one song when the White House called and said, we're doing an evening of spoken word, but if you have anything on the American experience, that would be great. I said I got a hot 16 about Hamilton.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
The first day Lynn brought the opening number of the show to me. I'm like, it's about history, but it's rap. Okay, is it serious? Sure, whatever. I remember it wasn't until I actually heard it all the way through. I'm like, wow, this is real.
Nothing left to do for someone less to stoop. He would have been dead and destitute without a sense of restitution. Started clerking for his late mother's landlord, trading sugar cane and rolling other things he can't afford.
When they posted videos of the evening, my performance went viral, and we were sort of off to the races after that. We realized there's a show here.
I'm the damn genius that shot him.
So I started writing songs at the amazing pace of a song a year. After 2 years of working, I had 2 songs to show for it.
So you've written 2 songs in 2.5 years. We're going to be very old by the time this is actually going to be complete. So why don't we expedite it a little bit?
And so I'm writing as fast as I can, but that's how it gets done. You set these deadlines and you meet them.
I have more than once compared Lynn to Shakespeare, and I do it without blushing or apologizing. Lynn in Hamilton is doing exactly what Shakespeare did in the central place. He's taking the voice of the common people, elevating it to poetry. In Shakespeare's case, iambic pentameter. In Lynn's case, rap, rhyme, hip-hop, R&B. And by elevating it to poetry, ennobling the people themselves. He is bringing out what is noble about the common tongue. And that is something that nobody has done as effectively as Lynn since Shakespeare. Yeah, I said it.
How to handle a financial situation, a nation, the states, what's the state of our nation? I'm fast, patiently waiting, I'm passionately smashing every expectation, every action's an act of creation. I'm laughing in the face of casualties and sorrow. For the first time, I'm thinking past tomorrow. And I can not throw away my shot. I can not throw away my shot.
I write everywhere. I write on trains. I write wherever I can. And sometimes, a couple of days, I've written in Aaron Burr's bedroom. It's pretty amazing to be in the space where he was in the later part of his life. Talk about artist in residence, literally. This is my Hamilton writing desk. I sit here, I sit on the floor, I don't sit on the colonial furniture.
Keep shooting up at the map.
There's a song in the show called My Shot, and it's Hamilton's big sort of I Want song. It's the 2nd song in the show. We see him make his group of friends, the Marquis de Lafayette, John Lawrence, Hercules Mulligan, and Aaron Burr, who is a colleague and a friend, and I'm sort of putting him into the song, because these are guys who are oil and water, but they come up together. They're revolutionaries together, they're soldiers together, they're lawyers together, they're elected officials together, and at some point, one shoots the other.
Yeah, I come out in the first 3 minutes of the show and I say, I'm the damn fool that shot him. And so what that tells me as an actor is that that is not a secret that we're keeping. That's not a piece of the puzzle that we are hiding behind our back. So then what it's about is it's about the fracture. It's about watching where exactly the moment is that it all changes.
Whereas Alexander Hamilton was an illegitimate orphan kid from the Caribbean who was born into shame and misery, Aaron Burr was really born into American aristocracy. It looks like he's going to have this very luxurious life. By the time Aaron Burr is 2 years old, his mother's died, his father's died. He's farmed out to relatives who bring him up. He then goes to Princeton College, graduates by the time he was 16, so that Burr was as much of a prodigy as Hamilton was. And so it's the first of many strange parallels in the lives of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr.
A lot of the revising process is continuing to check in on that relationship. It is the most important relationship in the show. So right now I'm working on lyrics, working Burr into the second song in the show. There's a section where they're doing shots and saying what they would do with their shot. So Lafayette, whose command of English is not so great, goes with my shot. I dream of life without monarchy. Something stressed in France will lead to anarchy.
Anarchy. Are you say I all anarchy? When I fight, I make the other side panicky with my shot.
And then Hercules Mulligan, who was a tailor's apprentice, says, my shot. Yo, I'm a tailor's apprentice, and I got young knuckleheads and local parentis.
I'm turning up rebellion, cause I know what's my chance. And so should they get fans. Instead of sewing some pants, I'm gonna take a shot.
And then Lawrence, who was a fierce abolitionist, goes, but we'll never be truly free until those in bondage have the same rights as you and me.
You and I do or die. Wait till I sally in on the stallion with the first black battalion of another shot.
So now I'm working on Burr, sort of jumping in on this, going, geniuses, lower your voices. If you keep having trouble, then you double your choices. Shooting off at the mouth, shooting from the hip, shooting the shit or something. Shooty shot. I haven't figured out how it works yet.
Geniuses, lower your voices. You keep out of trouble and you double your choices. I'm with you, but the situation is fraught. You've got to be carefully taught. If you talk, you're gonna get shot.
And then Hamilton comes in and, as it was his genius, synthesizes it all.
Burr, check what we got. Mr. Lafayette, hard rock like Lancelot. I think your pants will hot. Lawrence, I like you a lot. Let's hatch a plot. Blacker than the kettle, calling the pot. What are the odds that God should put us all on the spot? Not this walking conventional wisdom like it or not. A bunch of revolutionary ammunition abolitionists.
Give me your position, show me where the ammunition is. And then I wanted to sort of stun his friends into silence.
Well, am I talking too loud? Sometimes I get overexcited. Shoot off at the mouth. I never had a group of friends before. I promise that I'll make y'all proud.
Beep, silence. And Lawrence goes, just got this guy in front of a crowd. And then we go into the chorus. Hamilton didn't really meet Lafayette, Lawrence, and Mulligan all at once in the same bar, but we're going to meet them all at once because we got to go. We've got a lot of story to tell, and we want to get you out before Les Mis gets out next door. I'm a big fan of musicals that attempt to wrestle history to the stage, and everyone writing a musical about history is standing in the shadow of Sondheim, standing in the shadow of John Wyman. Why do we go to history? Why is real life more interesting than whole cloth?
It's interesting because what happens is when you live through history, you don't know it's history. You know? And so you have to talk to John. John's a historian. I only write historical shows with John because I love going to school and learning, but history, I couldn't get into it, as we say. And I think maybe John was the person who got me interested in history very late in life.
In all the shows that Steve and I have written together, including Assassins, you reach a point, I think, where the research is over and you then invent the character who actually existed in history.
But they're still partly defined by what they did. That's it.
Absolutely, and that's what the audience will bring into the theater with them, so you have to be aware of that, but they live in a kind of a penumbral area where they are who they were, but they're also who you want them to be.
Well, that leads me to a really good bit of advice you gave me early when I was writing Hamilton. I was drowning in research. And what you told me was just write the parts you think are a musical. And that forms its own spine.
You'll be back, soon you see. You remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You remember that I served you well.
King George just sort of showed up in my brain. It doesn't make sense on paper that he should be a character in this musical. He's all the way across the ocean, far from the events. He and Hamilton never met. At the same time, to give him these moments throughout the show robs the American Revolution of its inevitability.
Each piece of music is specific to an emotion and a character. Even though it's about history, Lynn has found a way lyrically and musically to connect it to now. And so having the King George psychology be like a breakup song from Britain to America, I feel like makes it really relatable.
None of the shows we're talking about are documentaries. None of them are book reports with songs added. I mean, ultimately, they're an artist's inventions.
Yeah, I got into the history through the characters. John got into the history that surrounded the characters, and then we met there. He sparks me, and I spark him. Or as George Firth said, I collaborate him, and he collaborates me.
Is it last maybe sad? Some niggas everything away and then they go to the chorus and then go to Lawrence. I'm ready to see how low. Right, Lawrence was the bringer of that.
The cabinet meetings are really my favorite part of the process. They are when I bring in a song to my collaborators, let's say the story of tonight, and I go, here's what I've written, and then we pull it apart.
I don't want to lose the
Okay. Okay.
That's worth saving to me.
So that means starting, not
Starting
to think so.
I wear a lot of hats in Hamilton. I'm the music director. I'm one of the arrangers with Lin-Manuel. I am the orchestrator. I am the conductor. I am the keyboard player. I take on all those duties just because I feel like I have such a strong opinion about how I think something should sound, but also because I feel like I know what Lin is looking for. I feel like I know how it is that I can execute his vision. I don't think it's about tacking on another chorus unless you think it just needs that. I don't think we need it.
But I feel like Andrew's going to have a million things to weigh in on.
Choreography to me is the writing idea, the lyric idea, the emotional idea, that then it is exaggerated into a heightened state and it becomes physicalized. What's amazing about our team is we're finishing each other's sentences all the time. What Lynn writes and Alex arranges works for me choreographically. My ideas meet Tommy's sensibilities. So that's why our work can be seamless. That's why it feels like one thing goes right into the next.
Anything else with the Hamilton, Washington back and forth? You guys good? Okay. All right, moving on. As a very mediocre American history major, I was exposed to a lot of these kinds of stories told in very different ways. And what I wanted to try to do was remove any of the black and white nostalgia, sepia tone, and make this feel vital and vibrant. Here comes the general. Ladies and gentlemen, here comes the general. The moment you've been waiting for. Here comes the general. Right of Mount Vernon. Here comes the George Washington.
If you wouldn't come to her, she'll come to you, huh?
Austin's over. He's just lost New York. His army is as close to being annihilated in that moment as you can imagine.
To me, in that way, suddenly takes us out of the history books. It takes us into the urgency of, oh, we might not win.
Initially, when the war begins, there's a lot of retreating on the part of Washington. And what he's trying to do really is just keep the war going.
He's
he's juggling how to get all of these soldiers out of harm's way and away from all of the ships that are still in New York Harbor. He has nowhere to turn to but Pops Hamilton.
I've done something wrong. On the contrary, I called you because our odds are beyond scary. Your reputation precedes you, but I have to laugh. Hamilton, how come no one can get you on this staff? Don't get me wrong, a young man of great renown. You stole British cannons when we were still downtown. Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox wanted to hire you.
Yeah, to be their secretary. I don't think so.
Well, why are you sick?
I'm not.
It's all right. You want to fight. You got a hunger. It's just like you when I was younger. Head full of fantasies of dying like a martyr.
Yes.
Dying is easy. Young man living is harder.
It's really fair to say that without Washington, Hamilton would not have had someone to enable him to achieve the things that he achieved. Conversely, without Hamilton, Washington wouldn't have had someone there to help him and advise him. When you're in someone like Washington's position, there aren't many people that you can truly trust.
Hamilton had distinguished himself multiple times as a warrior. It's probably one reason why he was frustrated that he was not then promoted as a warrior, but then was promoted as a secretary and aide de camp to George Washington.
It's rare that you do a show where you have so many literal touchstones, places that support the research that you've done. It's helped keep the fire burning, day after day, doing the show 8 shows a week, and being able to imagine yourself in a very real way in those same footsteps.
That would have been Mr. and Mrs. Washington's room. You're looking at it just as they would have seen it.
I can't even imagine how much stress he must have been under. I can't. All those guys, like how much stress they must have been constantly every day. Just you got 20,000 people out just right outside your door who are constantly, trying not to die. Trying to figure out how to stay alive, like
Literally trying not to die. The front parlor would have been used by General Washington's aide-de-camps. Hamilton, along with John Moore, they were the 2 prominent secretaries that worked for Washington here. All the paperwork that took to administer the Continental Army is being done in this room here.
As Washington's aide de camp, Hamilton's doing everything from sorting through intelligence to carrying out prisoner exchanges. He's writing essays, he's writing letters, he's teaching himself about foreign currencies. So he was really using the American Revolution as a kind of crash course in history and politics.
Just being in the Valley Forge, you realize how much ground they had to cover. When he was like, retreat, attack, retreat, we're moving our men back, it's like, that's like miles. That's like crossing state lines without a car or horse and carriage. Those are soldiers that are like foot soldiers. The scope of it is just so much bigger and far more real.
Yeah, we having reenactments out there. Yeah, we do it every now and then. We do cannon firing and that kind of thing.
Would they let us fire a cannon?
We'll get you out of the musket.
Oh, yeah.
Hell, that's good.
Yeah, fight out of the musket.
Hamilton, by all accounts, was girl crazy. And so throughout the Revolutionary War, he's not only searching for military glory, but he's searching for the woman of his dreams.
Where do you take me?
I'm about to change your life.
Then by all means, lead the way.
Elizabeth Schuyler, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Schuyler,
My sister, thank you for all your service.
if it takes fighting a war for us to meet, it would have been worth it.
I'll leave you to it.
Eliza and Alexander essentially met during a war. Hamilton was camped a couple miles away from the house that Eliza was staying in.
This is the house where Elizabeth Schuyler came to visit with her uncle and aunt. Her aunt realized that it's hard to find a boy during wartime. They've all gone to the front. Go visit Auntie and meet some men. And she met the guy who was staying next door, Alexander Hamilton.
Everyone immediately noticed that Hamilton and his future sister-in-law, Angelica, were really enamored of each other.
Hamilton met Angelica first, and their connection is actually really strong and intense and it's intellectual.
Lynn actually credits Angelica with being the smartest person in the show. What she could do with her pen, what she could probably do with the look, was very, very potent and probably had to be.
I've been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine. So men say that I'm intense, that I'm insane. You want a revolution, I want a revelation. So listen to my declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I will compel him to improve. We're beginning the sequel.
In this period, women were still very much assumed to have a certain role, but that said, it's also important to note that the revolution politicized women. It politicized enslaved people. It politicized people who were there at the time living the revolution. It's important to remember that's not just men who assumed that.
The wives of the founding fathers also really had a place in history. They worked as hard as the men did. And Abigail Adams asked her husband to not forget the ladies.
Look around, look around. How lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening in the mountain, and we just happen to be in the greatest city in the world. In the greatest city in the world. Angelica, Eliza, the Schuyler sisters. We're looking for fire. Hey, in the greatest city, in the greatest city in the world.
I'm going to fix myself a gin and tonic because the only thing in my fridge is tonic water and some ketchup. There are 3 major projects happening right now. It was our first day of rehearsal. There's my infant child who turned 2 weeks old today. And then there's an apartment which is finally ready, but now doesn't have people to help unpack it. We worked really hard all weekend. This is as far as we got. We start staging next week, so we have a week to learn all the music. 52 songs, not including the ones I haven't written yet. Today, second song we taught was Yorktown, and Hamilton's line, then again my Eliza's expecting me, not to mention my Eliza's expecting, so, you know, we gotta go, we gotta get the job done, we gotta start a new nation, we gotta meet my son. Like, Hamilton in that moment is actually where I'm at in my life. It's like, he's got one more battle to fight before the war is over. But he's also got a kid on the way, and his status depends on how he does. I'm in exactly the same place, which is nuts. But I'm basically near the end of Act 1.
The Battle of Yorktown, 1781. Monsieur Hamilton. Monsieur Lafayette. In command where you belong. I just say no sweat. We're finally on the field. We've had quite a run. Immigrants, we get the job done.
Hamilton keeps badgering Washington, and Washington gives him his first field command at Yorktown, and Hamilton does not waste the opportunity. He led a bayonet charge. Hamilton and his men rose out of the trench under the glare of shells exploding in the sky above them. They charged to the parapet of this fortification, and within 10 minutes he had taken this fortification. So Hamilton, who had dreamed of battlefield glory from the time that he was in his early teens, suddenly has it big time at Yorktown. There were still skirmishes going on, but for all intents and purposes, the war ends with Yorktown. It's clear at that point who will be the victor.
We booked a slot to open the show at the Public Theater, home of Hair, and Chorus Line, Runaways, Passing Strange, countless other landmarks.
This is one of those nights where you feel the earth shake a little bit. You feel the world start to change. This is opening night of Hamilton. Congratulations to all of you.
We've been doing this for 5.5 years, and here we are pushing it off into the world, and to see people react to it, respond to it, and be moved by it, it's all you care about. So we're thrilled.
My parents saw Runaways on their wedding night. This isn't like the blood.
I have never in my life witnessed a musical that has penetrated the American culture faster than Hamilton.
It's called Hamilton. It's about Alexander Hamilton.
theater. Tariq, you saw too, right? Quest, you saw?
Yeah.
Well, how amazing is this play?
It's life-changing. After the first two songs, I looked at my wife and we were like, this might be the greatest thing like we've ever seen, ever. And you kind of look around and other people say like, are we right? Like this is the best thing that's right. We're all on the same, but you can't say that because people are acting and performing, but we're almost in tears.
We sell out our extensions as quickly as they go on sale, and the decision is made pretty quickly. We're going to Broadway.
On Sunday, tickets go on sale for Broadway, Hamilton, Richard Rogers Theater. Be there. Thank you for coming to Sacramento.
Our show opened on Tuesday and the world blew up. This is crazy. I don't know what the future holds. I know that our show opened and everyone freaked out. That's where we're at. I've been a fan of the Roots as long as the Roots have existed. Maybe the most nerve-wracking performance I've ever done was when I knew Amir and Tariq were in the audience.
What immediately drew me in to Hamilton was this was someone who, was an MC in his own right. Sometimes in hip hop we say real recognize real. So I could recognize immediately that Lynn was a real one and that this was a real story.
There's double and triple meanings and layers upon layers. I mean, I've had to see Hamilton 8 or 9 times to get references that I didn't get the first 8 times that I saw it.
What Lynn was able to do is create different styles for each character. So George Washington raps in this very sort of metronomic way because that is similar to how he thinks. It's all right on beat. Lafayette has to figure it out. Lafayette is rapping in a real, simple, sort of early 80s rap cadence at first, and then by the end he's doing these crazy double and triple time things.
In just 2 to 4 hip hop bars, sometimes there are more lyrics than in a whole, classical song.
That's the crunchiest sound you'll ever hear on the beatbox, and both those lips are in detox. Yeah, slapping the bass right now, freestyling up in your face right now. Oh yeah,
Because I'm gasping something, because I'm right next to the ass of Jasperson.
I grew up in the 90s, and I think that's a golden age for hip-hop. The lyrical dexterity of artists like Mobb Deep and Biggie and Nas was just incredible. When I was writing Hamilton, I listened to Take Over and Ether on a loop, on a loop, on a loop. Word. Hip-hop storytelling. Like where do you start? Do you start with the story? Do you start with the lyric? Does it sort of unlock something else?
Really, I saw a hole in the rap game. All the rappers I looked up to were megastars, and so if I wanted to put my little 2 cents in the rap game, then it would be from a different perspective. I thought that I would represent for my neighborhood and tell their story, be their voice in a way that nobody has done it.
And I love the idea of telling the stories that you haven't heard told before and suddenly making that fair game, because I think that's such an important part of expanding sort of the real estate that hip-hop can cover.
Yeah, when it was my time, it was the phrase keep it real became the thing. So it was tell a real story.
These things are my thoughts, and let me express them. It gives you freedom. In hip hop, no one can tell you you're wrong unless the rhymes are whack. But but no one can tell you you're wrong because it's your truth.
Yeah. The hip hop in the musical has gotten the most attention because it's the most novel, and because Hamilton sings in hip hop, but there's jazz, soul, R&B, and just plain Broadway show tunes as well.
Hamilton doesn't hesitate. He exhibits no restraint. Takes and he takes and he takes and he keeps winning anyway. Changes the game, plays and he raises the stakes and if there's a reason he seems to thrive and so few survive, then God damn it, I'm ready for it. I'm ready to wait for it.
Wait for It speaks to Burr and how he sees the world. A world in which he's seeing contemporaries who started further back than him lapping him.
This is a man who lost his entire family, really, and then lost even extended family. And he had one sister who even lost her.
And Hamilton's response to loss is to go as fast as he can. Burr's response to loss is, I'm not going to do anything until I know it's the right move. I'm alive. Other people I love are dead. There's a reason for that.
After the war, Hamilton and Burr qualified to be lawyers at almost exactly the same time. They then moved to opposite ends of Wall Street, and they are the two rising young men in the New York legal establishment. It was Alexander Hamilton who personally issued the call for a constitutional convention in Philadelphia in May 1787 and gave a 6-hour speech in which he proposed his own form of government, in which he says that there would be a president who would serve for life on good behavior.
For Hamilton to stand up and say, hey, let's get this guy in and sort of make him look pseudo-king-like, having just finished the revolution, that was really controversial. It's really after the Constitutional Convention that Hamilton has his major impact on this debate, and that is with what becomes known as the Federalist Essays. It's going to confront people's biggest fears about this new Constitution. It's a commercial advertisement for the Constitution.
I've read the Federalist Papers many times over. As an elected official, as a person who takes office by swearing oath to the Constitution, I pretty much want to know what that means, right? And so it's important not only to understand what the Constitution is, but to understand what the principles are behind it, and that's why you look at Hamilton. That's why you look at the Federalist Papers. That is the cornerstone of this beautiful idea we call the American experiment.
Here we are, back at the scene. It's been a long way since 2009.
Yeah, it's not. The First Lady tweeted last week, Alexander Hamilton, we are waiting in the East Wing for you. It's incredible.
It's incredible.
That's great. It's very weird to have Lotus quote your lyrics.
Are you all excited? I am. I'm so excited. Well, let me start by thanking the extraordinary performers from Hamilton. I saw the off-Broadway version of Hamilton, and it was simply, as I tell everybody, the best piece of art in any form that I have ever seen in my life. So thank you for taking the time out to spend an entire day here and to bless us with another performance. Today they've come here to spend the day with all of you. I want you to take advantage of this time.
I'm not a really bright student in the history department. I've learned so much from this musical that I wouldn't have normally learned in a history class. And for you guys to convey history in the manner that you did, was that your initial goal, to inspire kids like me?
In my high school, we didn't have a theater program. History was my drama program. I saw each and every moment in history as the most dramatic moment ever, which it was to the people who were taking part in it. You might just take a second and look at it from the perspective of who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist, what's at stake. You might find a world there to unlock.
Here we are performing not just the opening number, but an hour worth of material with our full company and our full band. And it feels like this sort of homecoming, a full circle closing.
Amen.
Mr. President,
Good to see you.
Thank you for making time for us.
Absolutely, this is so much fun.
The first time you had me here was in 2009.
Right.
I was just supposed to sing something from the Heights. I sang Hamilton instead.
When you told us, well, no, I'm going to do a rap about Alexander Hamilton, we said, well, good luck with that. Right?
Yeah, that's the typical reaction.
And after the performance, I think all of us understood not only how much potential it had, but what it did was capture the fact that the founding fathers were, to some degree, flying by the seat of their pants and making it up as they went along. And the fact that the experiment worked was a testimony to their genius, and you can draw a direct connection between what the founders were doing and what we do today.
Yeah.
Even today, we really do follow the model of the executive from what Washington established, so many years ago. The two-term presidency, establishing a cabinet, Washington sitting at the head, allowing for everyone to have their own influence in policy, is pretty significant.
He's going to have a very small cabinet, and will turn out to be Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of Treasury, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, Edmund Randolph as First Attorney General, and then Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State.
I think of Jefferson as Bugs Bunny, man. I think of him as this indefatigable winner who kind of comes in with incredible confidence, gets home, he's already Secretary of State, and he's like, all right, well, let's go.
Following us to revolution, there is no more status quo. But the sun comes up and the world still spins.
Thomas Jefferson has a lot to catch up on. So when we meet Jefferson, he's still singing jazz songs, and the rest of the United States has moved on to rap music, and he doesn't know that. Nobody told him.
So what did I miss? What did I miss? Virginia, my home sweet home, I wanna give you a kiss. I've been in Paris meeting lots of different ladies. I guess I basically missed the late 80s. I traveled a wide world and came back to this.
Misses the whole war in France and comes back and is made Secretary of State.
He was the perfect person to do this, having come back from his diplomatic mission. So it was his job to try to represent the United States and to let Washington know about what he knew.
Mr. Jefferson, welcome home, sir. So what did I miss?
In Jefferson's absence, Alexander Hamilton has soared from obscurity to one of the top posts in government.
Alexander Hamilton, as Treasury Secretary, was Deputy President in many ways.
Hamilton has to create much of the federal government from scratch. First budget systems, first tax systems, first customs service, first Coast Guard, first monetary policy, first central bank, which was the direct forerunner of the Federal Reserve.
Hamilton had the core idea about an aggressive role for government to help build an economy.
Hamilton created financial instruments that enabled people to trade and therefore facilitate the movement of capital.
While Hamilton was Treasury Secretary, there were only 5 securities traded on Wall Street. 3 of them were Treasury securities created by Alexander Hamilton. The 4th was the stock of the Bank of New York, created by Alexander Hamilton. The 5th was the stock of our first central bank, created by, you-know-who, Alexander Hamilton.
I look at Alexander Hamilton as the patron saint of Wall Street.
We're on the floor. We're living in Hamilton's world here.
It's true. And as I was coming down to meet you this morning, I got the chills. When you're actually here and you just visualize what was taking place 200 years ago, it's quite extraordinary.
The problem was, Hamilton was the ultimate elitist. He came from very humble background, but he built an institution that concentrated wealth.
If you've lived through a period where the financial system has caused a lot of damage to the economy, there's this fear over concentrated power and wealth, and fear of the unfairness that might bring. And Hamilton's defining strength was to try to figure out what was the pragmatic solution in the interest of the most people.
What happens here has a direct impact on all of our lives. We're all connected. And the fact is if you want that bridge built around
Hamilton is picturing this robust, strong central government that is the engine of finance and engine of democracy and unites our states. Jefferson is picturing this agrarian paradise where farmers are left alone and do their thing.
One could say that Jefferson could represent the populist interest at the time, the small farmer, the people living out in the country. But were they forecasting a philosophical divide that run throughout a political system? Absolutely.
It becomes really clear, and Washington realizes this finally in 1792, things are not going so well between the two members of his cabinet.
So we're in the mansion's dining room, and it's set for the 1790 dinner party of George Washington and his cabinet.
It's set for that now?
It is set for that. Just if they walked in right now, they would be ready.
A lot of people don't know that the fight over the debt plan and establishing a national bank happened here.
The issue on the table. Secretary Hamilton's plan to assume state debt and establish a national bank. Secretary Jefferson, you have the floor, sir.
The states had borrowed heavily from the French, from the Spanish, from domestic lenders to fund the cost of the war. And there are these big debts.
There's $50 million in outstanding federal debt, $25 million in state debt. And Hamilton wanted the federal government to assume responsibility for the state debt.
Ow, but Hamilton forgets. His plan would have the government assume state's debts. Now place your bets as to who that benefits. The very seat of government where Hamilton sits. Not true! Oh, if the shoe fits, wear it. If New York's in debt, why should Virginia bear it? Our debts are paid, I'm afraid. Don't tax the South because we got it made in the shade.
Jefferson's position is the southern states have ways of making income. It doesn't make sense for us to bail you guys out. Hamilton's point being that a lot of the reason that you're okay is because you don't pay for labor where you are, and you've got slaves working your farms.
Hamilton insisted as a matter of national honor and to establish America's future greatness that it was imperative to pay off that debt in full.
If you assume the debts the union gets a new line of credit or financial diuretic, how do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost, you'd rather give it a sedative?
The fights between Jefferson and Hamilton that they had across this table are the fights we're still having.
Yes. Well, I can't imagine what dinner around that table would have been like that night. Washington, I'm sure, is sitting there stone-faced, trying to placate everyone at the same time.
Hey, turn around, bend over, I'll show you where my shoe fits.
Madison Jefferson, take a walk. Hamilton, take a walk. Hip-hop is the way for, young men and young people to still
Test each other.
Yeah, to test each other without anyone being hurt and everyone, can go back home at the end of the day.
The stakes are not who's the best rapper. The stakes are what direction are we going to go in as a country. Every rap battle sets a historical precedent. That is the highest stakes you could have for a rap battle, higher even than 8 Mile. Something that really sort of spoke to me when I was reading this story and beginning to research and write it is that moment when we trade away capital in exchange for the debt plan. And we call it the room where it happened. And what have you learned being in that room? I mean, we're in that room. We're in the room where the sausage gets made.
I'm in most of the rooms. There's no doubt about it. And what you learn is that everybody who comes to a room to make decisions, they're bringing the constraints that have been placed on them by their constituencies. And the only way anything gets done is if people recognize the truth of the person across the table.
Two Virginians and an immigrant walk into a room diametrically opposed.
You have to be able to get in their heads and see through their eyes in order for things to happen.
Here's the problem, Mr. President. Okay, how are we going to solve it? I mean, it's pretty simple.
They emerge with a compromise, having opened doors that were previously closed.
Check this out. This is the room where it happened. Hamilton says, you gotta help me pass my financial plan. Jefferson goes, oh, well, okay, come over for dinner. I'll invite Madison. We'll work it out. And now it's an office building, and this is where the smokers hang out from this building.
No one else was in the room where it happened. The room where it happened. The room where it happened. is in the room where it happened.
A lot of that debate was not really a debate about central banking. It was a debate about power.
The federal government came in and bailed out the states. And so I guess in that sense, it was the first bailout.
What did they say to you to get you to sell New York City down the river? Did Washington know about the dinner? Was the president where it happened? Where it happened?
He's a super fan of the arena. He's watching Hamilton in there, making things happen, and this is the moment where he decides, oh my God, I gotta get in there.
Washington had been serving for 45 years of his life, and he wanted to return home and actually enjoy the fruits of the labor that he had invested in the building and in the establishing of the government itself. Washington is revered as father of our country, but our understanding of history goes awry when we only seek or care to listen to one part of the story. From the moment I knew I was going to be playing Washington, it was the first thing that came into my mind, the slave question. The reality of the fact that he owned people. I'll never make peace with it. I tried to, till I stood in the slave quarters, and there's no way to reconcile that. If anything, it brings to bear the entire truth of who this man was. And some parts are ugly.
The yeoman farmer. Wow. Easy for a slaveholder to say.
The interesting thing about him is that he is the author, the principal drafter of this document that says all men are created equal. And that is a paradox.
You don't have to separate these things with Jefferson. He can have written this incredible document and several incredible documents that we all sort of with things that we all believe in, and he sucks. I think those are both true, and those have to be both true. I think we really have to stop separating them, because that's where we get into trouble. That's when you stop letting people be whole people. I disagree politically with a lot of rappers that I listen to. You know what I'm saying? There's like sort of rampant misogyny and homophobia in a lot of rap music. That doesn't make them less brilliant rappers. They're both true.
These are not perfect people. These are deeply flawed people.
Some of those barriers and allow a reflection to be truer.
What I think is that there's something incredibly pure and fun about the casting, that our imaginations really will let us take these leaps. And that we don't have to be so closed-minded, especially in the theater, that it can be whatever we want it to be.
Anticipate the pleasing expectation and retreat, in which I promise myself to realize the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens.
Washington had an extraordinary American life. I think the most extraordinary thing he did was step down from the presidency, ensuring that this American experiment would continue without him. By modeling a peaceful transition from president to president, he puts us eons ahead of every other fledgling democracy on earth.
Teach 'em how to say goodbye. You and I.
I think it's so important to take George Washington off the pedestal. These were real people who lived and died. I think one of the things we really try to do with the show is show them all as flawed. There's no saints in the show, not a one.
It's really logical to ask the question, given all of the ways in which he's extreme, what kind of a guy was Hamilton? I would say to a lot of people, a lot of the time, he was an arrogant, irritating ass.
His big flaw, his inability to shut up, his tenacity, his drive, they're all great things in the war. It's great when we see him writing to Congress and saying, we need more stuff. But in the absence of a common enemy, that virtue goes inward. They go from assets to flaws. And that explains things, like the Reynolds scandal. This young woman, Mariah Reynolds, shows up at Hamilton's door one night. She gives him this sob story about her husband who abandoned her. She asks him for money. She needs his help.
And he felt bad for her. So he ended up giving her some money, but that turned into an affair. Her husband ended up finding out about the affair and decided to make some money out of it.
Hamilton forks over the blackmail money and continues the relationship for about a year.
The story leaks, but with fuzzy details, and Hamilton gets accused of speculating in Treasury securities with James Reynolds.
So he decides he's going to write a pamphlet in which he argues, and in his mind this is the truth, that no, he's a perfectly correct public figure. He's never done anything bad as a public figure, but as a private figure, he just committed adultery and paid blackmail for it.
It really reads like a cross between a dissertation and a Dear Penthouse letter. He's not bragging, but the language is complicated.
Liza was so traumatized by the publication of the Reynolds pamphlet that she never publicly commented on what had happened.
What we have is a letter from Angelica to Eliza saying, you married an Icarus, and he flew too close to the sun. Which is true that Eliza burned a lot of their correspondence. She wanted Hamilton to be known for his political acts. So I recast that burning of the letters as an act of anger and acknowledgement of betrayal.
She didn't really have options. She couldn't just leave him. She had 8 children. On top of that, there were a lot of hardships.
The second act of Hamilton's life centers around the loss of his child. His eldest son, Philip, is gunned down in a duel about Hamilton. The duel began over a disagreement because George Eaker had said unkind things about Philip's father.
As ridiculous as it seems that Philip would go and duel for his father, and that people would duel anyway back then, you know. It's the same as people going out and fighting somebody, or you know, because they said something about their mother, or they said something about their family, or their sister, or their brother, or their dad.
Hamilton was absolutely unhinged by the death of his son. And when you see paintings of Hamilton from those later years, he suddenly has aged tremendously. And it definitely is a somber note to his final years.
Can we get back to politics? Please. Yo, every action has its equal opposite reaction. John Adams, the bad. I love the guy, but he's a trash. Poor Alexander Hamilton, he is missing in action, so now I'm facing Aaron Burr with his own faction.
It could be argued that Burr was not a very good politician. In that election of 1800, when it's Burr and Thomas Jefferson, and Burr comes really close to becoming the president of the United States, he's backed in that race by 2 different parties. That is how malleable his beliefs were.
People will say, boy, Burr is a handy guy to have with you in an election because he doesn't have really strict principles. Hamilton writes a letter saying, he has no principles. Like, why is that good? This cannot be good. It ends up that there's a tie between Burr and Jefferson, gets thrown into the House to be decided, and so there's Hamilton facing the future of one or the other of these men who he really doesn't like are going to be president.
Jefferson has my vote.
Jefferson becomes president, Aaron Burr becomes the vice president. When Jefferson ran for re-election, Burr goes back to New York State and runs for governor, only to find that he is again thwarted in his ambition by Alexander Hamilton, and Burr loses for governor. You know, at this point, Burr flies into a rage. It seems like at every stage of his career, the man blocking his path of advancement is the same Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton is the patron saint of our museum. Nice. And so, yes, you're in Hamiltonian country, Leslie, but we'll do our best to try and do a little bit of a balance for you here as we move forward. All around your original Hamilton artifacts and some others we've brought up, but why don't we take a look at some of the treasures that we have here? Awesome. Lynn, Leslie, this is a book published in 1804, a collection of the facts and documents related to the death of Major General Alexander Hamilton. You want to read some of those? Or?
Political opposition can never absolve gentlemen from the necessity of a rigid adherence to the laws of honor and the rules of decorum. I neither claim such privilege nor indulge it in others.
Burr one day reads in an Albany newspaper that Alexander Hamilton at a dinner party has uttered a despicable opinion about him. Burr challenges Hamilton to a duel.
A reply. It's several pages. Sir, I have maturely reflected on the subject of your letter of the 18th last, and the more I have reflected, the more I have become convinced that I could not, without manifest impropriety, make it the avowal or disavowal which you seem to think necessary.
Hamilton could have ended the whole affair just by apologizing if he had inadvertently given Burr offense.
It is evident that the phrase, still more despicable, admits of infinite shades from very light to very dark. How am I to judge of the degree intended? Or how shall I annex any precise idea to language so indefinite?
If you and I were getting into something, I would send you, I might piss you off on Twitter, and then you send me a text, and I send you a text back, and then it's on. I mean, these guys they wrote long letters, in impeccable penmanship. There was so much time for it to cool off, for it to not get to where it got to.
And it goes on.
Can you imagine getting a letter like this back? You're like, wait, I sent you a paragraph. You know what I mean?
I have the honor to be A.him.
I think from a modern outlook, the practice of dueling makes absolutely no sense, right? Because it means two guys go out onto a field in early morning and shoot at each other because they're angry at each other. What does that accomplish, right? Seemingly nothing. But people didn't duel to kill each other, which is a really hard thing to get your brain around. They went to a dueling ground to prove that they were brave enough to be there, and thus were men of merit.
Your letter has furnished me with new reasons for requiring a definite reply. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient aide. Wow. That's great. Lawyer.
It's Burr looking at his life and saying, wow, at every point along the way, my barrier was you. What do you have to say for yourself? Hamilton, smartass as he is, saying, you're going to have to be more specific than that. I say a lot, but I do.
These are 18th century dueling pistols. The first thing to do is you would pick up your weapon and you would keep it vertical, and you would put some powder in, and then you would take out the rammer, you'd invert it and ram the powder down. Okay, then you would...
There's so much time to apologize.
At dawn on a July morning in 1804, traveling in separate boats, Hamilton and Burr travel up the Hudson River to Weehawken across the Hudson River from where West 42nd Street in Manhattan is.
Hamilton had a lot of insecurities and vulnerabilities about his reputation because of his origins. Over the course of his life, 10 times he almost got involved in a duel. All of those times he negotiated his way out. And most affairs of honor, that's what happened. Unfortunately, with Burr in 1804, they don't manage to do that.
And we get to his final moments. There's just him, this bullet coming at him, and all the thoughts that can ping through his brain between that bullet leaving the gun and hitting him.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. Is this where it gets
He does a tally sheet. This is Hamilton. He thinks about the things he's done in his life. He thinks about the country he's leaving behind that didn't exist when he got there. He thinks about the people he's going to see on the other side.
Lawrence leads a soldier's chorus on the other side. My son is on the other side. He's with my mother on the other side. Washington is watching from the other side. Teach me how to say goodbye. Rise up, rise up, rise up, and rise up.
And in the last moment, the snag that keeps him from going there is Eliza. Because he leaves her behind with a lot. And then he does it anyway. He points his gun up at the sky in that final moment.
My love, take your time. I'll see you on the other side. Raise a glass to freedom. Is this up the sky?
There's a lot that we could have done. The fact that it went down the way that it did is a tragedy for both of them and for all of us. You know, was a fighter and a survivor for a long time. He had risen to a certain station in life by the time him and Hamilton ended up on the grounds of Weehawken. He wasn't friendless, he wasn't jobless. I mean, he had risen to that station based on relationships and based on accomplishments. I think that our show is doing a really good job of reminding us that all of us are more than one thing.
Now I'm the villain in your history. I was too young and blind to see. I should have known the world was wide enough for both heaven and...
If that's all you're looking at is our worst act on our worst day, any one of us could be painted as a villain. It's really about the totality of something.
How much time do we get on this earth? We don't know. They don't tell us at the outset how much time we get. It's something I've been sort of grappling with and terrified with. I think we all grapple with it. I think we all grapple with the paradox of knowing tomorrow's not promised, but making plans anyway. You know, Hamilton walked into that duel. He had a lunch date with a client on the books that same day. You don't plan for your life to end.
Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. That no control who lives, who dies, whose house or storm.
I give him this. His financial system was a work of genius. I couldn't undo it if I tried. And I tried.
Hamilton built our modern economy. And once we built it here in the United States, the rest of the world looked around and said, pretty good idea.
Alexander Hamilton, I think, is one of the more uniquely American founders because this man came from nothing and rose to the highest levels of serving this country. He proved the condition of your birth should not determine the outcome of your life.
Alexander Hamilton is somewhere going, thank you. Finally, someone has given me the respect. I created this whole I created what money is in the bank systems. I created all that. I get no thanks for that.
It wasn't easy to get to where we are today, but it was dictated by and led by a vision. We're a blessed nation to have had our founders, such remarkable men.
I think when faced with the incredible 3 lifetimes Hamilton lived while he was on this earth, it forces you to reckon with, well, what am I doing with my life? That's the thing you're always up against when you're writing something that's big. It's, God, can I be proud of this at the end of the day? If this show opens and closes in a day, will I regret the 6 years I put into it?
The Tony goes to
Hamilton.
I'm well aware that the outside part of my life, the whole zeitgeisty moment that is happening, if this were a movie, there would be newspapers spinning and flashbulbs. That's what this section of the movie would be.
And the Tony goes to.
And the Tony goes to.
The Tony goes to. Hamilton.
Hamilton. Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton was a dreamer. I stand on this stage tonight surrounded by dreamers.
I keep waiting for life to go back to normal. We've finished unpacking our apartment. Adriana's still out of town. Haven't gotten around to that yet. I knew that Hamilton was going to change my life. But I didn't anticipate how much we'd help Hamilton's legacy in turn. Not just Hamilton, but also Liza, for whom Hamilton's legacy was so important.
Hamilton captures the spirit of American entrepreneurship and making it and hustle. I think if Hamilton were alive today, he would look back and say, America succeeded beyond his wildest dreams.
I feel like Hamilton chose me. He reached out of the Chair Now book and grabbed me and wouldn't let me go until I told his story. Can't manufacture another Hamilton. I'll never write another Hamilton. Hamilton is singular, the man and the creation of the show. I feel like my responsibility is just to sort of keep my eyes open and live it as slowly as possible, because I am aware musical theater does not get off the arts page often. And here we are.
I can't wait to see you again. It's only a matter of time. Let me tell your story. So nice, who tells your story? Let me tell your story. Who tells your story?
And now, take a look at some of the shows coming up on the PBS Arts Fall Festival.